Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is David Beard. I'm with Schools Out Washington. We support expanded learning opportunities after school and in the summer, which includes school-age childcare, and we're also part of the Youth Development Strategy Table. And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, David. Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Sarah Brady with Childcare Resources, and we work with providers in King and Pierce County and also host the statewide call center.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Well, you've already heard a lot about what's been happening during COVID, and we want to get a little more granular. Our presentation is going to really what are we experiencing within programs. So you've heard a lot about system level and even a little bit about family level needs. So now we're going to kind of get what is it like in what are providers experiencing right now. So some of the major challenges are around max capacity and child ratios. And it's not necessarily that we're asking for higher ratios right now because we want to keep providers and children and youth and their families safe. But that causes an economic impact when you have less children allowed to come into a program. Financial loss for the programs is mighty because of the lower ratios, but also because families are having to make very different choices. And you'll hear a little more later about what some of those choices are and why they're having to make them. Deprioritization of infant space, huge losses for some school-age childcare. You know, since we do support school-age childcare field, a couple things to note. One is there is licensed care, but in the school-age space, there's also a lot of non-licensed care that happens as well. And so in both of those spaces, less people coming into the market for myriad of reasons, but one of those being now care is a full day, everyday experience for families that need childcare right now, when normally you would only have a part day need. And the issue is that increases costs exponentially on top of already having lower ratios. So my organization worked with providers to do a cost analysis and found that it's about $1,100 statewide per month per child right now. And in King County can be as high as $2,000. Layoffs and turnovers are happening right now. And of course, a high call volume for people trying to find childcare. Of course, the issue if they don't qualify for subsidy is can they afford it? And then finally, there's also a need for multilingual and culturally relevant services for families, especially in a very chaotic time like this, where many families, of course, are experiencing job loss and illnesses related to COVID. So a little more on the ground experience. And this is from a provider right now who, you know, is paying slightly above minimum wage to their employees. But as you can see from this quote here, and this was back in July. So as of August, they were not able to continue to do that. And I'm sure likely may have had to do layoffs and even potentially program closures just due to not having enough funding to make ends meet. And we're seeing that all over the state right now.
So with the Working Connections Child Care Subsidy, we know that Working Connections is a workforce support program, but who is the workforce that's eligible for Working Connections? Through our work with the Child Care Aware Family Call Center and our subsidy programs, our experience is that these are largely shift work employees, especially, for example, the service industry. And these are industries that have been severely interrupted by the pandemic. Everything we're seeing here was true before the pandemic. It's just really in high relief right now. For families that were laid off or furloughed, when their Working Connections reauthorization comes up, they don't have a work activity to be able to maintain their childcare subsidy. And that means that they lose their subsidy and are not able to nimbly pick up new job opportunities or additional shifts when those reopenings happen. We're also seeing families that were on unemployment insurance and received that bump to unemployment insurance that is counting towards their income for Working Connections. And so when they come up for reauthorization, they're suddenly over income for Working Connections because at some point in this pandemic, they received unemployment benefits. And the same is happening with hazard pay. And the issue of the eligibility cap, eligibility income threshold being too low is especially stark right now. If you think about low-wage essential workers, those who are working in grocery work, delivery, sanitation, those are employees who are over income for Working Connections largely, even if they are well below what's considered poverty level by the federal HUD standards. And so we're seeing that this setup is really disincentivizing workers from taking raises and from full-time hours. And there's an impact to the providers as well. There are programs that take a large amount of subsidy, even 100% of their slots might be subsidy. And if a parent loses their job during the pandemic, that provider loses a huge portion of their income. I know providers that actually will just continue to charge the family a copay if they lose their subsidy and eat that cost themselves. So it's really this kind of instability that makes it hard for providers to take those working connection slots, especially when we need more of them. And this is an example of a parent that really shows how many impossible calculations families are needing to make. This is from our child care resources subsidy staff, of a mom who was experiencing homelessness, and she had been working but lost her job due to COVID. She received unemployment that set her, so she lost her working connection subsidy because she was over income, and not having childcare or work or housing was really hard in her efforts to find new work. And even before COVID, if she had to be careful not to make more than 16 an hour or work full time, otherwise she might lose her subsidy. So it's just really challenging calculations for low-wage families to make. And a big unknown where I know we're all thinking about is what kind of care families are going to need or feel comfortable with in the coming months and year. But we do know that they're looking for the most affordable option, and that may not be keeping their child in a program where they have a bond with the provider or their needs are best met. Providers are doing everything they can right now to keep families because they really need them. There's a lot of reasons why attendance is erratic this year, and working connection subsidies are reimbursed per day. So if a child 1 month only comes 5 to 10 days, the provider is still holding on to that slot for that kid, even if they're not getting paid for most of the month. And with private pay, you see providers weighing how long can I keep this empty slot to keep this kid enrolled versus how much can I ask of my families who aren't attending to continue to support in some way. So these are really tough choices that they're having to make all on their own, and it's very daunting. And family friend and neighbor care, this is a preferred option for many families, especially those with new babies and kids with disabilities. It's a common form of care in communities of color and immigrant refugee families. And it's also really important in rural areas or access deserts where there's not a lot of childcare options. So we're hearing anecdotal evidence of the increase that some families are preferring family friend and neighbor care to reduce exposure. But on the flip side, also concerned about exposing elderly grandparents who might be caring for kids. Of the care that happens overnight care, weekends, evenings, 82% of that is often offered by family friend and neighbor caregivers. So it's also a really critical support for essential workers. And we're also hearing of youth who are doing a lot of caretaking for their younger siblings and potentially at the expense of their own remote learning. And I'll say that something that really weighs on me is how this era is going to impact kids in the years to come and what the impact of the trauma and stress that they're experiencing is going to be. So I'm reminded that what we do now to respond to this pandemic is going to have ramifications for years to come. And childcare providers are filling way more needs for families than ever before. They're one way that some families are able to keep their kids on track for school. I'm thinking of some immigrant families that we work with whose home language isn't English, and the parents have not felt fully able to support their kids with remote learning. So having the child be able to go to childcare is a really important way for those kids to stay on track academically. And providers are holding everyone down. They have 8 kids in a room from 8 different school districts with headphones on, and they're trying to hear the teacher's instructions, and they really need more collaboration with the school districts. Expulsion rates, really should be studying how the school to prison pipeline is showing up in childcare right now. There's lots of evidence in K-12 of how children of color, especially Black and Indigenous children, kids with disabilities, dual language learners are receiving punitive discipline at higher rates than their white peers for the same behaviors. And that's leading to a higher likelihood of involvement with the criminal legal system. So with all the demands on providers right now, limited support, there's a low tolerance for behavior management needs, and we need more support in childcare to address those needs for kids and address how racism shows up in our early learning system. Physical activity is simply not really happening right now. Kids are really it's hard to get kids moving when they have to be sitting on their computers for so much of the time. And then continuous access to care. Childcare can be the one thing that's stable for kids' lives when so much is being disrupted. And I'm thinking of kids experiencing homelessness during a pandemic, where childcare may be the safest place for them to be during the day. So it is a more important protective factor than ever.
And so now kind of expanding a little bit upon the relation to the K-12 system and education. I mean, overall, 0 to 12 in childcare, we have trying to maintain quality is tough right now when there's so many budget and other restraints. For school age providers in particular, we're facing a lot of challenges that, we've been requesting the help from OSPI and legislators and others to really help resolve some of these major issues. So getting online with dozens of learning times is a huge problem. And I put an example of that there on the left. You can see those are all the different times from all the different kids in one program in a rural program in Southwest Washington that I think is split up between 2 childcare classrooms. So as you can see right there, that is kind of a monster. As she was saying, the increase in behavioral issues. We're also seeing an increase in referrals from schools to childcare programs for students on IEPs and students that are English language learners. The challenge there is that often are given referrals with no supports coming from the districts to the programs, no outreach, no information about the child to the provider, which is not only obviously a learning issue, but it's a safety issue at that. I talked to one program with 20 kids and now has 8 kids on IEPs in one program. And as a reminder, these providers are often making, not much above minimum wage and also don't have the same benefits as our friends in the K-12 system, and they're now expected to be doing K-12 work. Limited resources from the K-12 system for space, transportation, supplies, technology, which is not necessarily the K-12 system's primary directive, of course, but if we're just being kid-focused here, figuring out how we share those better is going to be really critical. And we'll talk about solutions in a second. And then just a general refusal to partner in many school districts with the childcare system. Normally, I would not come on a legislative hearing and be quite so blunt, but I think we're just at a crisis point for a lot of our kids, and certainly for our providers who are burnt out, and for a lot of our kids that just have really limited learning. And one other thing we didn't put on here, but that should be noted, is right now providers are also experiencing some pretty heavy, what's the word I'm looking for, input from parents and even from some teachers being highly critical about getting kids on learning times or completing homework, which again is not the child care provider's primary responsibility. So that just adds to all of these other things that they are facing right now. And as was talked about mental health, this is a great chart from Department of Health, just kind of looking at, what we expect to see in a pandemic around behavioral health and mental health impacts. And right now, we are sort of in the disillusionment phase, which basically means a lot of people just sort of resign to what's happening right now, and also feeling very down and hopeless. And maybe with the vaccines, that will pick up, but that, of course, has a huge impact on our providers, parents, and children themselves. And here was just one Seattle parent that was just talking about all the different complications happening inside a classroom, childcare classroom, from their kids who are worried about losing their providers, not just due to financial constraints, but just due to the stress and pressure that many providers are facing right now, and may not want to stay in the field.
So looking at solutions, and I'm grateful for my colleagues at the task force for the amazing work they've been doing on mapping all of this out. I want to acknowledge that we're in 2 pandemics, COVID-19 and racism, and on both accounts, we do not want to go back to normal. We truly need change. In childcare, we've been in a crisis long before the pandemic, but this is our chance to address these systemic issues. So we're urging the legislature to invest in ways to pay providers. Providers do so much more that they aren't paid for. And we really need to stop relying on this uncompensated labor of a largely women of color workforce. And if we're serious about eliminating opportunity gap and investing upstream, then we need a system that doesn't penalize struggling families when they hit hard times. So these are 4 categories of support that need addressing: financial relief above all else, mental and physical health, community supports, and removing barriers to care right now. Their compensation is a huge aspect of the financial support that's needed, both for the long term, addressing that, as well as short term. Relief grants is one example of ways to get more financial support for families, waiving copays, and finding a way to raise the eligibility threshold for working connections so that we actually can capture the low wage essential workforce, and enrollment-based payments as a way to deal with the ratio issues and limited income in programs. Healthcare for childcare providers, they are frontline responders, and way too many of them do not have healthcare right now. This would also be a big way to incentivize child retention for staff who might have reasons to leave the field right now if they don't have healthcare. Child mental health consultation, are protecting that system that we currently have. Technology and internet access. I know this is a big theme in the K-12 world, but really urge that childcare be considered and receive the same level of support. And family friend and neighbor supports for family friend and neighbor care. Kids are not meant to be raised in isolation, but that is happening right now. So looking at what the programs in the community that are giving families a chance to connect and have some relief virtually, and investing in that, and also things like supplies, technology, and financial relief are also needed in that community. And streamlining emergency licensing to expand, so programs can expand and adjust for school-age care needs, and investing in translation and developing culturally specific materials. And finally, just across the board, building in as much feedback and conversation with families and providers as possible, and data collection that accounts for disparities based on race, so that as we build back, we're building a system that really meets those needs.
And then, I think always childcare and school-age childcare has been a part of kids' educational K-12 needs. By supporting families, by supporting homework, and actually giving them time to explore different concepts and sort of have fun with learning, which they're hopefully also doing in the classroom. But I think now our providers, quite frankly, are in person way more often right now than our K-12 system is. So they are actually in front of these kids. So they are a critical part of the K-12 system right now and likely into the future. So what we're hoping to do to help make this better for kids and students, and ultimately families, providers, and the K-12 system itself, is implementing some things right now. Of course, funding is always going to be needed, but there are some other things we can do to really help alleviate it. And even if it's not coming from the state side, some very strong state encouragement from particularly the legislature, with half of our budget goes to the K-12 system. Can we start having some serious conversations with districts about really supporting the child care providers to support our kids? So some ways to do that, communication protocols, having really great communication protocols with parents and community providers, including assistance in making decisions. Many school-age providers are based on school sites. So for instance, if a district is going to an AB model schedule, that will impact a child care program that might be there. In fact, it might displace it. And then where does that program go? So making decisions unilaterally about classroom instruction without thinking about the other impacts to children and those supporting them is really important. So communications and timelines need to be decided together. A consistent classroom schedule, and this cannot be said enough, and I think also for parents too, we've also heard a lot of frustration about this, but having consistent scheduling and having all teachers and all grade bands on the same time as much as possible is really important, especially in childcare classrooms, because they can't support the children if it's all over the place, or can't support them very well. And they are more likely to miss Zoom times when changes happen, and it can impact Wi-Fi and other issues. Encouraging parents to sign FERPA forms. And FERPA basically allows the release of information to external parties. And with a parent signature, FERPA has pretty expanse in what can be shared with providers, and it's up to the parent. But so parents in the driver's seat, but really encouraging parents and getting them to sign it so that the provider can really support the needs of the child as best they can is really critical. Everything from reading levels to IEPs to behavioral issues. This one is really important around meeting students' needs with disabilities, having a virtual student protocol meeting requirement for districts of any kid on an IEP that's in a child care program, sitting down and making sure everyone understands what the IEP is. Oftentimes providers don't even know there's an IEP there, and the parents might tell them at some point, but they just don't know, and that's really important. And then finally, having districts really get their paras and IAs to be working, instructional assistants to be working with child care programs. So again, we can really support our students with disabilities and our English language learners. And with that, that's our contact information. And we definitely want to thank our partners at DCYF and other partners for just really being in this with us and trying to resolve